Well, good morning, Father's House. Welcome to our Sunday morning video service. You know, we're starting a new series this week, so we thought we'd have a new setting for it too. So we're glad to have you join us. I just have a couple of things to go over. Even though we're in a new setting, there's not a lot of new announcements. So our men's group is on hold for the month of August, and they'll kick off again right after Labor Day. They're going to start a new series out of a book called The Warrior. So if you want to be a part of that, let Pastor Carl or Pastor Carlos or CR know, and they can get you a book ordered, because I know they'd love to have you be a part of that. Our ladies group is still meeting on Thursday nights at 6:30 on Zoom. Again, we'd love to have you join us, whether you're in the area or out of the area. That's the lovely thing about Zoom meetings. Today is our Mission Sunday for our tithes and offerings. You can go to thefathershouse.org and give as a one-time gift or a recurring gift. You can give to our missions that way also, and you can give to our stage remodel. We've been talking about live streaming our service so that the people that are out of the area or watch this video service are able to see our worship team and what a fantastic job that they have brought to the Father's House family. Speaking of our missions, we've got, I got a beautiful video from Pastor Juan today. They were doing Kids Day in Tucumán today, and they had everything decorated in beautiful, bright colors. They had the kids all around a table. They were serving them cookies and treats that the other ladies had made. So I wish I could share that with you. I should tell Pastor Mario to put it on our Father's House page, or I guess I could. So that you have an opportunity to see those children, because they are beautiful. And speaking of our mission in Argentina, I guess it's their rainy season now. So they've got the church building built and the orphanage built, the structure, the framework of it. And it's made out of brick, if you can imagine that. And one of the walls that is facing the weathered side the worst is getting mold coming through it. So they're trying to raise about $600 in order to get that wall plastered so that it will seal it and not let the weather come in. Pastor Mario said it would cost about $600 for that wall. In reality, we need to raise enough money to do the entire building. That would be wonderful. In fact, I think Pastor Carl's going to ask Pastor Mario to get with Pastor Juan and see what that cost would be. So we'll do a follow-up on that one. But anything that you can give to the missions or to the stage remodel would be greatly appreciated. I would ask that you don't give it in lieu of your tithe and offering, but if that's what you choose to do, I know God will bless you for that too. So that's really all I have to cover today. Again, thank you for joining us, and we'll turn the time over to Pastor Carl to start our new series out. Thank you.
Well, good morning, Father's House. How are you today? I trust everything is going well, that you're having a great week and a great weekend as we get ready to this next week. We're into the 21st today, which means we've got roughly 1 week left of August. Can you believe that? And we're going to be here shortly into September. Next Sunday will be the 28th, and after that we're headlong into September, and then coming up would be Labor Day weekend. So there's a lot going on, and I hope that you're enjoying these last days of summer. Thank God it hasn't been well over 100 or in the hundreds. It's been in the low to mid to high 90s and even in the low 80s. So the weather's been great here in San Jose. If you're not in San Jose, I trust and hope that the weather has been good where you are as well. Anyway, as Penny said, we've kind of got a new backdrop, trying this out to see if we can't come up with kind of a different, mix it up as we start this new series that we're talking about. I said last week we're going to start this series on the 7 pillars of wisdom as it relates to kind of the notion and the idea of, well, again, obviously us as Christians and of us becoming wise. And understanding that, if we think about wisdom as a whole, I guess what we would call our exemplar model is what would be our exemplar cause would be another thing, or our blueprint for a life of wisdom would ultimately be Jesus Christ himself. We know that. We've been talking, though, since throughout this year about the idea and the notion of the virtues for the first part. The last part we were talking about some men who possessed an extraordinary spirit, namely Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, and Carlos talked about Joseph. And so this week I kind of want to continue next couple of weeks on the idea of wisdom and kind of relating it to a text in the book of Proverbs, and then also relating it to the life of Jesus, as I said, because he's our blueprint, our model of what personified wisdom looks like. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. I don't know, it might be 3, 4 weeks, maybe 7. It won't be any longer than that. There's 7 pillars. I'm going to talk about 2 today, and maybe we get through them, and maybe we don't. Maybe we just leave a comma there. I'm just not quite sure yet how we're going to handle that, but we'll let that take care of itself. So today what I want to do is I want to talk about these 7 pillars in the book of Proverbs. And what you're going to see is I'm going to read the entire text concerning it, about 12 verses. And in reading these 12 verses, there's a couple of things that are going to come into play here. It's not going to be clear necessarily what we're talking about when we talk about the 7 pillars of wisdom. Now, I say that because it's all over the board with scholars as to what the 7 pillars of wisdom are and whether or not they're really important, or if they're just symbolic of the fact that there should be a firm foundation and that wisdom always provides that. I want to say, though, that I think that you find them in the text, and I think there are 7 pillars of wisdom that Solomon, the writer of this book, or this section, is actually talking about when he talks about the notion of wisdom. And so we're going to tease them out of this text as we kind of look at this text and as we kind of see how it is that they relate to our lives. I'm not looking to this as a how-to manual because there is no how-to of wisdom. But the idea is for us to be intentional about pursuing wisdom and righteousness and other such things. You see, the idea is that when we become Christians that God does it all isn't entirely true. If God does it all, there would be no moral responsibility on our behalf. And yet we know that that's simply not true because we couldn't be judged for the things that we aren't morally responsible for by way of our free actions, our free will to choose how it is that we want to act. So we're going to talk about wisdom, and it's become one of my favorite subjects for several reasons, but mostly is because it's something that really the Bible tells us that we're to seek. Now, I want to go back to talk about it, and I've talked about it in past videos, and I think that it's relevant here as we kind of talk about it today, is the idea, remember that when we talk about, and I've given the notion of the idea that wisdom never fails you. You don't lose your wisdom. Well, I guess you could say it, as long as you're pursuing it and continuing in that. But the notion is this: the idea is sometimes in life we chase the wrong things, don't we? And what we end up is we end up disappointed. So some of us seek financial gain, financial wealth, thinking that we're going to find security in financial freedom and by the money that we have. Others we find that they find or think that security in life is in things that they possess, and they're these possessions. Yet Jesus says that those things are an illusion, right? And that's not the sum total of what life's about. Other people think that it's in having a strong body or perfect health. Others think that it's in being famous, for example, or others in glory or in honor, like that would be of a judge or something along those lines. And those others would think of it by way of being praiseworthy of men. And yet what you find is that in all of those instances, when we're on our deathbed and we're getting ready to pass from this life into the next life, every one of those things is going to fail us, aren't they? We'll no longer be receiving the praise of men. We'll no longer be in a position of honor or a position of power. We'll no longer be wealthy. We'll no longer have any of our possessions because we leave all of that behind. But what Scripture seems to indicate is, as much as we leave those things behind, it seems that the things we're going to be judged on before God, and I don't mean that in a negative way, the things that we're going to be held, let's say, okay, let's put a different word, will be held accountable for is whether or not we've developed ourselves concerning the notion and the idea of, our virtues, our moral character. And we talked about this last week when I talked about self-mastery, mastering ourselves. We talked about Cain and Abel before Cain slew Abel, that God had a conversation with him and he said, Abel, don't do this with your brother. I know you're having a hard time because I've accepted his offering and not yours, and you're jealous of your brother. But remember, Cain, sin is crouching at the door, and you must master it. And so for all of us, the idea of sin is the absence of that which is good. So the idea is that we've got to master that which is good in our life, and we've got to shun evil. In other words, we're to do what is good at all times and shun or reject those things that are evil. I say all of that to say that when we talk about these 7 pillars of virtue, that these become foundational, fundamental truths for our lives, so that what we know is that we're pursuing wisdom and not something else. We're not chasing something for the sake of chasing something that in the end is going to only lead to ruin, or in the end is not going to give us the ultimate fulfillment that we desire to have. As I said, I've known many rich people that the day that they died, they left it all, everything that they had. They didn't take that didn't transfer them with them onto the other side of life. The same thing with health, life, all of those things in the physical sense. And so when we're talking about wisdom, the one thing through the book of Proverbs, and really through all of Scripture, is there's always this admonition to acquire wisdom. And I want to tell you that that's the beginning of wisdom. And we're going to talk about that by way of the pillars. So in Proverbs chapter 9, we're going to read the first 12 verses. And what we're going to see is wisdom is inviting us to a feast that she's prepared. The idea, though, is in this invitation, remember, you've got to accept the invitation and participate in the feast if you're going to find the wisdom that she wants you to find in her. So in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 1, it reads as follows. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out 7 pillars. She has prepared her food. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come eat my food and drink the wine that I have mixed. Forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. He who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, but he who reproves a wicked man gets insult for himself. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to the wise, and he will still be wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in his learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself, but if you scoff, you alone will bear it. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is I want to talk about this idea of being invited by wisdom to partake of this feast and be part of this feast that she's talking about. Now, what I said later on is after she's invited the naive, which would basically mean the simple-minded, she's basically telling them these are the ways that you're ultimately going to acquire wisdom, or these are going to become the pillars of your house of wisdom if you'll listen to what I'm saying in the riddle that's presented before you. You see, the thing about Scripture is it's not always presented before us in a very straightforward way. Sometimes what it takes us to do is to think, ponder, and just kind of regurgitate in our mind what it is that's being said. In other words, we become or learn to become better learners, have better reasoning skills, logic, if you will, to understand what's being said, to comprehend what's being said. Sometimes what we do is we read the Bible through too fast, and we don't get that understanding. And the other thing is that when we read texts over and over again, and because we know them, we tend to skim them and not look for a deeper meaning. But I want to say that in this text I just read, and we'll probably read the entire text all the way through this series, there are certain things I think that become her explanation, meaning wisdom's explanation, to what wisdom is. The first 2 things that I want to look at are picked up in verse 6. After verse 5, it says, come and eat my food and drink the wine that I have mixed. And then she's going to give instruction to the naive or the young man or the simple man. And she says, forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. So the first two pillars that I think that Lady Wisdom is talking about here, and she really isn't just talking to men or young men, she's talking to anybody. She's talking to women, young women, maidens, I guess, of the day. She's also talking to us, our young men, and also older men, because what you find is age does not guarantee wisdom, does it? And so she says there's two things that have become pillars of wisdom. The first thing is to forsake your folly. And the second thing is to pursue wisdom or proceed on the path of wisdom. What she's saying is the beginning of wisdom, the way that we acquire wisdom, it starts with the idea of not finding ourselves engaged in foolish activities that don't take us to our final destination. The final destination that Lady Wisdom wants for us is to become wise. Remember that last text? It said, wisdom is good for you in and of itself. So the end is, wisdom is something to be gained. Early on in the text, I think in the very first chapter of Proverbs, she says it is more precious than silver and more valuable than that of gold. That wisdom is in itself an end that we're looking for. It's not a means to an end, it's the very end. It's the end because it makes us more like Jesus Christ, more like God. We have more godlike character because we possess wisdom. But Lady Wisdom says that it doesn't come easy, that we've got to incline ourselves to understanding, incline ourselves to forsaking the ways of folly. Let's talk first about this notion, this idea of folly. Have you ever met anybody in life and that as they go through life, maybe they're 45, 50, 60 years old, and you look at them and you realize that they've been and lived a foolish life all of their life. They may be 55, 60 years old, and they're still living life and partying like they were 16 or 17-year-old in high school. In other words, they never got past their teen years. They got stuck in this party life and this fun life and this life of just pleasure and pleasing themselves. And so what happened is that you find they may have acquired many things or they may not have. But there's a lack of depth in their wisdom, and they kind of live life 2 inches deep as far as their roots go and a mile wide. Sure, they have a house, maybe a nice house. Maybe they have boats, cars, jet skis, water skis, whatever the case might be. But at the end of the day, what you find is they live a life of folly because they've never given themselves wholeheartedly to the study of wisdom. What wisdom was saying is if you want me, and if you want to be and to have me as this building that you possess, that's a part of you, the first thing that you have to do is to forsake foolishness, to forsake folly, a partying life. Now, there's that extreme of somebody that's just out and outright partying, but there's this other part where sometimes we're foolish because we find ourselves being foolishly lazy in pursuing wisdom or pursuing knowledge or understanding. We think that it might be too difficult, and I want to tell you it is difficult to acquire it. But what in life isn't difficult to acquire? If you get a degree in let's say you want to become a doctor, a medical practitioner, maybe you want to be a general practitioner as a doctor, how many years does it take for you to get there of hard work and hard study? What about a registered nurse, a lawyer, an engineer? What about all of those different things that are hard study? And you basically, in some cases, you have to reject folly. You have to turn yourself away from folly and from foolishness to devote yourself to the discipline of the career that you want to have. Wisdom is no different. That one of the first pillars that we do and that we have to erect in our house of wisdom is to shun folly. To when we find ourselves in relationships, when we find ourselves in reading articles and books and listening to the news and political opinions, of resisting the folly of the time so we can understand deeper what it is that God wants to teach us by way of giving us understanding. The second thing it says is to forsake your folly, and then it says to pursue the path of wisdom, to put yourself away from this party life, from this foolish life, from this life that doesn't add anything. And again, it can be honor, praise, glory, fame, wealth, things, all of those different things. But all of those things pale in comparison to Lady Wisdom and the house of wisdom. So the second thing it says is, forsaking the life of folly, pursue or walk on the path of understanding. This word understanding that's being talked about there is the idea and the notion of discernment and discretion in all things. In other words, it's learning, first of all, to learn how to discern between good and evil, right and wrong. Those things we ought to give our attention to, and things that we shouldn't give our attentions to. Why do we want to waste time in life on things that we should not be giving our attention to? Yet we find we do it all the time. For us to walk in the path of understanding, or to begin that journey of understanding, it means that we've got to learn to discern the things that are secular and the things that are holy, or the secular, or the holy and the profane. Those things that belong to this world and those things that belong to God. Those things that belong to natural life, maybe a life of folly, and those things that build the pillar of wisdom through understanding. The idea of discerning it, the idea of discretion, of knowing what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is worth our effort, and what we ought to not give our effort to. That's understanding. In some cases, if we think about it, it's really Jesus with his disciples in the book of John. In the Gospels, what you find is right after his baptism with John, he goes on this journey And the first thing that he does is he stops, and there's a few men that he calls to be his disciples. The first, James and John, come up to him and they start to follow Jesus after his baptism. And Jesus turns around and asks them what they want. And the disciples said, we want to know where you live. In other words, we want to know where wisdom lives, divine wisdom as found in Jesus. We want to know more about you. We want to discern your nature. We want to reject the way of folly because we've found something so valuable in you. Jesus looked at those disciples and he said, come and I'll show you where I live. Along the way, he saw Peter mending his nets on his boat. And he looked at Peter and he said, come and follow me. Peter, recognizing him as the Messiah, immediately dropped the folly of his nets, the folly of his ways, to follow this divine figure of wisdom that we find in Jesus Christ. We find that he sees Nathanael in a tree and does the same thing, calls him out of the tree and says, follow me, walk with me, and you'll see amazing things happen, Nathanael. In every one of those cases, Jesus beckoned them to follow him, to walk with him, to become his disciples. Wisdom is exactly that for us. It's forsaking our follow and pursuing the path of understanding. The beginning of that path for a Christian is the person of Jesus Christ. He's the model of our wisdom. Through his life, through his teaching, through what he conveys to others, through the healing he brings to others, we begin to understand what Christian wisdom is in its entirety. But the idea is this: for us to have and to build a house of wisdom, first things we have to do is reject folly, to get rid of folly, to not want to participate in folly, and to pursue the way of understanding. That's not a one-time event. We don't turn away from foolishness just one time in our life. It's a choice we have to make every single day of our life, to resist those things that we can so easily come in contact with. For a lot of us, it can be listening to the news every day and getting all worked up about what the news is saying, reading the headlines, looking at our bank accounts, whatever the case might be. But at the end of the day, we have to make the choice whether we're going to resist that and seek out true understanding on a day-by-day basis. Put ourselves on the path of understanding. We do that when, first of all, we focus on God. And when we begin to do that, then we begin to look at the things that build the house of wisdom. And that's understanding, discernment, discretion, knowledge. But that's not something that comes easy. It's a hard fought after lesson. Wisdom is not free, and wisdom is not cheap. She will require your whole life in pursuing her. Today, though, the question is, will you say yes to building a house of wisdom? Do you want to live and have your house, live in and have your house be a house of wisdom? If that's the case, then every day wake up and say no to folly and say yes to Lady Wisdom. Yes to understanding. Yes to understanding what it is to live and walk as a Christian in today's economy and world. I hope you'll think about this today. We're just going to kind of leave a comment as we go into it. The first two pillars that every house of wisdom is built on is rejecting folly, forsaking folly, and walking and pursuing the path of understanding. Understanding doesn't come in a day. It will take a lifetime, your entire lifetime. Wisdom promises that if you pursue her and seek her, that you will find her, and she will build for you a mansion that cannot be destroyed, even by the death of your own body. God bless you. Have a great day, and I hope you'll think about it.